It's heartbreaking to watch your kid break up with friends or drift apart from their besties. But peer relationship changes happen to everyone.
The reality is kind of similar to how we have peer relationship changes as we shift things in our lives as adults. Kids do the same, usually related to activities that they're really involved in, whether it's clubs or sports or maybe being separated at the elementary school level in classes for a couple years.
As a parent, how much do you step in? And what is the right way to guide your child through these relationships?
There's nothing teens dislike more than being told exactly what to do.
Yeah.
But if we're kind of leaving it open-ended questions or giving them something that's like food for thought, then they can kind of come to those conclusions on their own.
And our kids are the future of journalism. We are going to introduce you to a kid who is now working for an award-winning program. Maybe your kid will be next. That's today on Mom Squad. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me on Mom Squad. We all know friendships are vital to a child's mental well-being and overall happiness. And it's so heartbreaking when we see them struggle with conflict or loneliness. In fact, new research shows just how much parents worry about our kids' friendships and try to help create those bonds. A Mott poll just released in September asked parents whose children were aged 6 to 12 about their children making new friends. 1 in 5 parents said their child has no friends or not enough friends. 90% said they would like their child to make new friends. Over half of the parents said their child has something standing in the way of making friends, like being too shy, not having enough time, or kids already having friend groups. 71% of parents said they tried to intervene in some way, like setting up play dates or get-togethers, or enrolling their children in certain activities so that they can make friends. Despite all of this effort and worry, we can't control what happens within those relationships. We can all remember friends that we had growing up that we either drifted away from or lost when there was a change in that peer relationship. It's something that can be really hard to deal with, and as a parent, it's hard to watch it unfold. My guest today is clinical psychologist Dr. Nicole Pucci to talk about why this happens and how we can help our children navigate these relationship changes. Nicole, thank you so much for talking about this today. I know with my kids, and my oldest is only 11, and then I have younger, but we've already seen peer changes and friend changes. And sometimes it's hard, sometimes I don't even notice. But if you can, talk to us about how common is peer changes?
Yeah, I think actually it's really, thank you for sharing that for viewers, because the reality is it's really common, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes parents don't realize that, which then makes it a little more scary for them. Like, I think they sometimes worry more that, oh, is something wrong, or are they not having enough friends? But the reality is kind of similar to how we have peer relationship changes as we shift things in our lives as adults. Kids do the same, usually related to activities that they're really involved in, whether it's clubs or sports or maybe being separated at the elementary school level in classes for a couple years. So I think just normalizing that this does come up a lot, and I get questions about it a ton.
Yeah. Are there any certain ages that this happens most commonly, or phases in the child's life that this happens?
Yeah, so I think having worked with high schoolers for a really long time, the one that comes up a lot is 9th grade year, right? A lot of students are then coming together with a lot of kids from different middle schools, whether you're at a public school or a private school. There's all these different kids that people are trying to meet. And so that is an age where we see it a lot, the relationship changes. Similarly, probably middle school. Yeah. And then when we're talking about the younger kids, I think it really seems at that age to be more like based on who they happen to be in class with at that given year, right? Yeah. But the ones where I think parents worry about it the most is probably the middle school and teenage years.
Is it because, let's talk about those years specifically, just because that's where, and we've talked about it on this show a lot, that's where the confidence changes happen. That's where puberty is taking its toll, you know, and you worry about a child's mental health as they go through all of that, because they're big kids, big problems, right? So like they're just getting into the social media aspect, maybe not, depending on what your philosophy is. Yeah. But why are those key ages to kind of look out for and maybe look at what's happening?
Yeah. So I think that's true, that it does seem to impact those kids maybe on a deeper level. And probably part of it is that we know during adolescence, the peer relationships are so vitally important to them. They start really valuing the opinions of their peers more than their family. Not to say that their family doesn't matter, because it really truly does. And I think parents sometimes need to hear that. But it's really normal for middle school and teen kids to be really invested in those feeling accepted by peers, right? And so that, you know, we can talk a little bit about different strategies, but I think that's at the core of why it feels so big at that age. You
know what's interesting too, and I'm just thinking of this. So my oldest is going into 5th grade, and they had to read the book Wonder. And I'm sure a lot of parents are familiar with the book if you haven't seen the movie. And we sat around in a group and we were talking about, hey, what struck you most about this book? And friendships. And I was thinking that they would talk about that relationship between the boys, between Jack and Augie, if you're not familiar with it. But a lot of the girls, and I was sitting with girls, they said, I felt bad for the sister who lost her friends going into high school. And it was interesting how they focused on that. And it was the first time I heard them really talk about, wow, you could lose your friends. So is there any, that made me wonder, in 5th grade, do I start to prepare them? And how do I start to talk to them about, you're gonna change friends, you're gonna drift apart, but then do you set, I don't wanna set any expectations either.
Yeah, that's such a great book, by the way.
Yes.
And I think you said something there that makes me think, this idea of losing friends. So when we're talking about friendships kind of drifting a little bit, I kind of think of it, or talk with teens or young people, a little bit differently. I don't know that it's as much of a loss. It might feel like it temporarily, but these same kids are gonna end up being in your classes later on, or your extracurriculars over here in a couple years. And we think about it more as, you know, this is the normal drift. We're not talking about bullying or anything. That's a whole different topic. But but I think of it more as like situationally based, right? Like, and that's how we kind of talk about it. Like, maybe a friend has become really involved in this. We know that everyone's kind of trying on different hats as they grow up, and we're just not aligned on the same page. But that doesn't mean we won't be aligned on the same page later on. Or even if we're never as close as we seemed to be when we were younger, it doesn't change the like care and positive memories we have. You know. I think this happens so much for us as adults, that the more we can kind of take that approach with kids, that, you know, we might just be on different pages right now and into different things, and we might reconnect with them later. That helps set them up for feeling like it's normal and not letting the emotions get overpowering, I think. Yeah.
So let's say a child comes home and it's the first phase of that drift, because I know that there's always that conversation of, well, you know, I don't know, I'm not hearing from that person as much, or there's always the one who's starting to feel left out. So if that is your child, what is the most helpful thing? You kind of touched upon it all already, but what is the most helpful thing to say in that moment when they come home from school that first time or the second time, and they're saying, you know, so-and-so is just, yeah, I feel like they're ghosting me, or I feel like they're not talking to me anymore, or I feel like, and it's hurting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the first thing we want to make sure, because this is hard as parents, seeing our kids in distress is like so
it's the worst.
Yeah, it's the worst. We want to fix it. We want to fix their emotions and ours. So the first thing would be kind of to separate out your own emotions. Now that we anticipate this will happen at some point or another, and keeping in mind that like our kids, like, we're going to be on both sides of this at some point. Sometimes our kid is going to be the one left behind or feeling that way. Other times it's going to be our kid who doesn't even know it and is maybe leaving someone behind. So keeping that perspective in mind, kind of separate out how you're feeling and be able to just be a really good listening ear for your kid and validate how they're feeling, right? So this would mean something like obviously showing empathy and giving them room to talk often kids just want somewhere to like have a listening sounding board. If they want to problem solve, you can ask really open-ended questions about that. Another key that parents really want to make sure they do is keep it situationally based as opposed to character based, right? And I think most parents know that, but if we get into, because you'll hear it from teens, they're upset. They will say things that are maybe based on the other person's character.
Yeah.
And as adults, we don't want to join them in their feeling.
Right.
We don't want to fix their feeling for them. We just want to be there as a supportive sounding board. So reminding them that it's often probably situationally based, and then problem solving with them, like different ways that they can distract themselves, engage in different activities. If there's something, you know, we don't want to directly insert ourselves, but if there's something that they want to navigate with the friendship, be willing to be open to problem solving or role playing with that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those are some ideas.
Some of the younger kids, before we move on to and continue with the olders and teens.
Sure.
I feel like I've seen it with a lot of friends, and we've all been through it, where you mentioned like not getting as involved. But I feel like that first time your kid is like in the, whether it's third or fourth or fifth, I feel like that's where like some of the peer relationship changes start.
Yeah.
And I know friends who have dived in there and they're calling the other parent, and and I've been tempted to do the same because you want to fix it for them, or you want to say, hey, we need to patch this up. What do we do? Do we get them together?
Right.
Getting involved as the parent, like, is there any involvement that should, or does that do them harm?
I think, well, it probably depends on the situation, right? I also think it sometimes depends on the closeness we have with the parents.
Yeah.
Like, that's the number one thing I hear is like, I'm really close with this parent. How do we navigate them drifting a little bit? I tend to be of the mindset of like, it's best if we help the kids kind of navigate on their own. Because I think we send the message, even from a young age, that if we insert ourselves directly, that we're not confident that they can manage it, or maybe even accidentally that this is a bigger deal than the kid even thinks it is. Like, if my mom is really worried, then this must be a really big deal. If you're close with the parent or something, I think there are times when you can have like the very like, oh gosh, I know they have not been spending as much time together. My son is really involved in this. How is your son doing? I'm sure we'd love to get them together soon.
Right.
That kind of thing I think is fine. But I do think we want to make sure they have opportunities to kind of figure it out on their own, because that's ultimately like how they're going to learn the skills to do it when they're older.
Coming up, if you have teenagers, one of the most difficult milestones is getting over that first heartbreak. Dr. Pucci and I talk about what happens when a romantic relationship ends. Welcome back. We've been talking to Dr. Nicole Pucci about how to help your child through changes in their peer relationships, whether it's a childhood friendship or a more mature high school friend group. Let's talk about those romantic relationships. Yeah. Teens, that has to be one of the hardest parts of parenting. I'm not there yet. I have friends who do have teens, but when they start to date and then they have that first heartbreak.
Gosh, I know.
I'm not looking forward to it. How do you, as a parent, what do you recommend for parents? And you've worked a lot with teens.
I've worked a lot with teens. Yes. I feel it on a very real level with them. My kids are not at this age yet, but yes, I've been in a chair sitting across from a teen who is really devastated many times. And I think the thing to keep in mind is we as parents often anticipate that it may not be a long-term, everlasting relationship. But teens often have a slightly different perspective, largely because romantic relationships at that age are so much about being accepted, right? Like, the idea of having someone understand you and accept you that's appealing to all of us, even as adults. But if you're a teenager who doesn't have a fully formed identity yet, oh my gosh, that means so much to you.
Yeah.
And then for that relationship to end, what ends up happening is often grief, right? it doesn't always look the same as what we think of as grief when we lose a loved one, but it is grief nonetheless. They go through a lot of like anger and denial and bargaining, like maybe we could get back together, maybe we can't.
Yeah.
Lots of sadness, and then eventually with time, acceptance. So I do think of it as like, if any parent is listening and going through that, again, you want to imagine it as like your kid is, it's just a really vulnerable time, and they're going through their own small version of grief.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I have to imagine, thinking back to my own days, when that romantic relationship ends, sometimes that's tied to other friendships.
Yeah.
So that's where it gets complicated, because then the teen might feel like, well, now our friends are split, or, you know, now I can't be friends with that person because they're in that group, and that's, I don't know, that has to be really hard to navigate as well.
I think it is, and I've worked with teens in a lot of different environments. Most recently, though, kind of a smaller school where like you do share friends, and I guess one of the benefits of, you know, if you're in a large community, there might be ways that you can lean into different friendships. And if you're in a small community, you're kind of forced to make it work and navigate that in ways that are not always pleasant. But I suppose I think it depends a lot on like whether you have other friendships besides that friend, besides the friend circle tied to the relationship. And for a lot of kids, that's also a good reason to keep your friendships, right? Sometimes we see teens get so invested in a relationship that it's one of the causes of this drift.
Yeah.
And so I think at any age, the best type of relationships are ones in which you can be yourself and maintain your own circle of friends. For exactly this reason, right?
So as a parent, do you tell a child, like, hey, make sure you stay friends with that person? You know, do you kind of give them this wisdom, this foresight, not to say like, hey, when you guys break up, because I'm sure that that's not the best way to put it, but is there encouragement there? I know with my kids, we've encouraged to keep friendships that we have like our summer friends where we hang out with them in the summer, but I say, we always talk about, as parents, we're saying, well, thank goodness, if something goes wrong with the school group, at least they have these friends outside of the school. But I don't know if we
kind of
blatantly
open-ended, I think asking open-ended questions is always a good idea. Like, oh, I love that you're so into this relationship. Sometimes it's an early stage relationship. Like, you know, you want to be interested in that for them because they are so excited about it. But also like, oh, hey, like when are you seeing XYZ friends, or are you still hanging out with them too? I think it's really good to have that balance. You know, they've been in your corner for a long time. So maybe something like that kind of approach where it's, you know, there's nothing teens dislike more than being told exactly what to do. But if we're kind of leaving it open-ended questions or giving them something to like food for thought, then they can kind of come to those conclusions on their own. And that's a really helpful way for them to not get so invested in just one person. It's at the exclusion of all their other relationships.
Before we did this interview, you and I talked about a little bit about sibling. Peer, like as a peer change or relationship change. And I'm one of four.
And
it's
same here. I'm one of four.
And it's just so interesting to look back on different phases of my life. When you brought that up, I was like, yes, we don't talk enough about how the sibling relationships kind of ebb and flow depending on what phase you're in and what you're doing. But that can be difficult for the whole family if it's not going right.
I think, you know, where it seems to come up the most is actually during adolescence, right? And I think parents have at this point been told so many times, like, anticipate that your kid, as they're going through puberty, as they're going through middle school, they're gonna kind of separate from you and spend more time with their friends, and that's really normal. And so I know parents expect that, but what we don't always anticipate is that siblings, particularly younger siblings, feel that loss too, right? Like all of a sudden this play buddy, my best friend that I've had forever, is now wanting to spend more time with their friends. And that can feel like a really big shift in the same way it does for parents. And so I think just always prioritizing some quality family time. I'm a big fan of quality over quantity. I know everyone's busy, but quality family time so that the siblings and you as parents still get that special time with whichever sibling is maybe in a different transition stage.
It would be very emotionally in tune for one of my younger ones to come up to me and say, Mom, I feel like my sister is drifting apart from me. So are there any changes? Because they're not going to come up and blatantly tell us. They might not even realize that that's what they're feeling.
They probably often don't.
No,
right?
no. So then are there signs, or are there little things that you think parents should be looking for when they notice that maybe that younger sibling is feeling that way?
I think a sign would be if they're, I mean, all siblings bicker. If they're bickering maybe more than normal, or if you notice the younger one picking fights more than normal, or if the younger one is maybe feeling, you can usually tell your parent instinct is usually pretty on if they're feeling left out or a little bit left behind. Certainly if they're saying those things, but it's not always that obvious.
Right.
But also if you're feeling that way as a parent, ding, 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 like just notice and start paying attention to how it's changing the family dynamic. Overall, these things are really normal, and it's like a healthy shift in the family dynamic, but we also just want to make sure we're incorporating along the way a time to come together so that we're still that strong family unit, because there's huge benefits to those kind of things for teenagers too.
Yeah. Is there, before I let you go?
Sure.
I remember being a teen. I know teens, I'm sure it hasn't changed. I don't know if I ever went up to my parents and just blatantly told them, like, okay, I'm going through a breakup, or my friend is leaving me out. It was almost, I remember when I did have a peer relationship change, I didn't go up and tell my parents, because it was almost like, I didn't know if I should be embarrassed that my friend and I are drifting apart or whatever. Are there any signs that your child is really struggling with it? Because I think that they don't go up and maybe you have that child, thank God if you do, but like if you don't,
right?
What signs do you notice?
Right, so I think, and it's interesting, there are plenty of kids who will talk to their parents, there's plenty of kids who don't. And sometimes if they don't, it can indicate that they're doing okay with it, but maybe there's something underlying if they're just not a kid who emotes a lot. So some other things I would look for are the same that we look for when any kid is struggling. So if they're isolating themselves, withdrawing, spending a lot more time alone in their room, appetite changes, sleep changes, oh gosh. Obviously, if you're noticing more negative self-talk that might be tied to the loss of friendship, might not be, any of those. The other piece is really our threshold when we, as psychologists or therapists, is if it's impacting their daily functioning. So if you start hearing things from school, or like their grades start dropping, or they don't seem as invested or as engaged in the activities they usually are, those would be signs that you're like, I wonder about this, and you might want to talk with someone at the school who knows your child well, or you might want to talk with a therapist if you have one, or a great first stop would be your pediatrician, right? Yeah. Who can usually have a good relationship and screen for those initial mental health pieces. Yeah.
Do you think school counselors are getting better at identifying some of these? I mean, just being in the school environment and seeing some of these. I know you were in the school environment for a while. Like, is that almost the first line of defense?
I think, it's funny, they spend so much time there.
Yeah.
That at a school, if your school is lucky enough to feel like the students are really known by the adults, then yes, I think that's a huge plus, right? I think I've come from an environment where the teachers were so attuned.
Yeah.
Not, in a very large public school, that might be harder, but usually your kid has a couple adults that know them really well. Or maybe even a coach who knows them really well and has noticed a change. I think they're a great starting spot. And if you absolutely do not feel that kind of connection with your school, then a pediatrician or someone else who knows your kid really well can be an additional sounding board.
Yeah. A big thanks to Dr. Nicole Pucci. Now coming up, journalism is an important profession and pillar of democracy. Our kids are the future. We're going to introduce you to one kid with a bright future who is already working for an award-winning program. Journalism will always be a critical career in our society, and making sure that we get kids interested early is important. In Phoenix, a 7th grader was recently named a Scholastic Kid Reporter, reporting news for kids by kids. Trisha Hendricks from our Phoenix station caught up with him.
My My favorite subjects in school are history, politics, geography.
Recently, Phoenix 7th grader Grant Killewald got some great news.
Recently, I was accepted into the 25th class of Scholastic Kid Reporters.
That's so fantastic.
He's now part of the Scholastic Kids Press.
I was shocked. I never knew that I'd get in.
It took a lot of time and determination.
Well, I had to write about myself, and I had to write a couple stories that I would like to do.
Those stories tied to a couple things he's passionate about, the upcoming election and the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary. It's a valley organization that helps rescue and rehabilitate reptiles. He even has one of his own.
I have a bearded dragon. His name is Jack.
Grant's now part of an award-winning international team of 27 student journalists that will report news for kids by kids. How cool is that? And Grant's stories will be published on the Scholastic Kids Press website and featured in its selected issues of Scholastic magazines.
He loves history and politics, which is great.
Editor of Scholastic Kids Press, Suzanne McCabe, says Grant's stories will likely fall into the realm of investigating stories in his area.
Maybe visiting historic landmarks, keeping an eye on elections, things like that.
I want to help inspire other kids to not give up, and I want to report on the truth.
He's always been interested in news and current events and paying attention to what's going on, so this is just a natural next step for him.
His dad, Rich, says he couldn't be prouder.
So proud of him, because, I mean, he did this work on his own.
And for Grant, this is just the beginning.
Oh, the sky's the limit for Grant.
Grant's thankful to his parents.
And I just want to tell you that I appreciate you.
And his parents can't wait to see him report in Arizona one day.
That report live from 12 News.
In 3, 2, 1.
Reporting live from Phoenix, this is Grant Killewald with Scholastic Kids Press.
Best of luck to Grant. We can't wait to see him on our airwaves one day. Well, thanks to all of you for joining me here on Mom Squad. Remember to join the squad by joining the Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle Facebook page. That's where we share stories, get your comments, and connect with each other. We'll see you right back here next time on Mom Squad.